Hi, my name is Ronit, and this past summer I worked as a Margolis intern in the Center for Policy Impact in Global Health. And before I go over my project, I just want to thank my mentors, Casey, Wenhui, and Osundu, who helped me immensely throughout this entire process. So my project revolved around understanding dependency on foreign aid for health. And the way we did this was through a systematic review. As a broader concept, donor dependency is a vulnerability in which developing countries that are receiving aid become reliant on that aid. And we were specifically looking at this within the health sector. Donor dependency tends to be characterized by a few things. One, an overwhelming portion of health expenditure within these recipient countries is actually coming from foreign aid. Two, there tends to be an inability to fill funding gaps with domestic resources when donor aid starts to decline. And as a result of this, there's also usually healthcare losses upon donor exit. The reason it's so important to understand donor dependency is because as it exists right now, there's a lot of inconsistent indicators and metrics across academic literature. And as a result of this inconsistent reporting, there tends to be a lot of literature gaps that exist. And the reason donor dependency is so significant is because when negative effects such as the loss of healthcare accessibility or health program cuts occur due to declines in donor aid as a result of aid shocks, donor transitions, or changes in donor governments. This tends to happen most in aid-dependent countries. And so if we can understand more about aid dependency as a concept, that'll help us devise policy solutions to help combat this. And so, like I said earlier, what we did for this project was conduct a systematic literature review. And this involved several steps. So initially, I started out by taking articles and capturing them from a variety of different databases, all pertaining to donor dependency. And this was done through a specific searching strategy. After the retrieval of 1979 articles, we performed a title abstract screen, going through all the articles and eventually reducing it to 358 articles, which we marked for potential inclusion. But that was only the first level of screening. After that, these 358 articles were again screened, but this time for their full texts to see whether it would be useful for the study based off a set structure of inclusion and exclusion criteria. And after this stage, we ended up with 64 articles for which we extracted data for 22 priority articles based off the degree of focus on the health sector. And I'm going to continue extraction with the rest of the articles, but these 22 priority articles are the ones that pertain most to donor dependency within the health sectors of recipient countries. And so among these 22 articles, we saw the findings show that there was 18 that provided quantifiable metrics for assessing donor dependency. And this is important because when the literature is reporting a case of donor dependency, we want to see that there's like some sort of benchmark behind it. 7 articles mentioned the Global Fund in relation to donor dependency, which is a major HIV/AIDS donor. So seeing that was interesting. And then we also saw that overwhelmingly the articles were reporting aid dependency cases in the African region, with 42% actually reporting within Africa instead of other regions. And so when we were analyzing the themes that started to emerge across the literature, just based off the regional distribution, the donor dependency seemed to be particularly concentrated in Africa, Central and Southeast Asia. In terms of income status, low and low middle income countries tended to have higher levels of donor dependency for health, which makes sense because they're probably less able to mobilize their own domestic resources. The trend that was seen across the literature was that donor dependency is projected to decrease as economic growth within developing countries increases. In terms of donors involved, like I said, the Global Fund and also US aid seem to be most associated with donor dependency, which again makes sense because these very large prominent donors, when they're giving large amounts of funds, it's easy to imagine why a country might become dependent upon those funds over time. In terms of impacts, one thing that was interesting was that donor policy agendas usually take precedence over the recipient country's policy agendas. And as a result, there tends to be struggles with health program sustainability by recipient countries because everything starts to become so donor driven. And then policy solutions, we've in the articles that we screened and extracted data from, there were a few different solutions that were being recommended. Improving the coordination of funds and projects, better planning for transitions in foreign aid, and then implementing innovative financing mechanisms to improve the way domestic resources are mobilized. And so ultimately, in terms of conclusions, the findings supported the expectations that donor dependency occurs in cases of large, prominent donors, low and low middle income countries as the recipients, and smaller economies. It was interesting that while donor dependency impacts development agendas, countries with high political will can still maintain their own decision-making power. And so in the future, potential direction is analyzing non-sector specific articles on donor dependency, ones that don't relate to health, and then comparing them to the findings from health-related articles. And then also analyzing donor recipient power imbalances in the case of aid dependency and identifying specific arenas of conflict. So before I end, I just want to thank everyone, all my mentors, leadership at the Huang Fellows Program for funding and providing guidance throughout this opportunity, as well as the Duke-Margolis Center team for facilitating this entire project. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this poster.